Tales of the Underworld has finally been dropped and we need to break it down, so let's get straight into it. We start off with episode 1 and we see two Jedis, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Quinlan Vos. The last time we saw these two together on screen was all the way back in the Clone Wars when the two of them were hunting down Zero the Hutt. If you're unfamiliar with Quinlan was a Kefar Jedi Master during the Clone Wars and is known for being a bit of a maverick and an expert tracker.
Yes, that Jedi has quite a reputation.
Maybe overstating it, Cody. Let's just say he's crazy.
He was in fact briefly seen in live action in The Phantom Menace as well. We see the two Jedi walk into the Night Sisters' lair on Dathomir, something which we have seen many times before, and given how quiet this whole area is, as well as the fact that Obi-Wan and Quinlan are still together, it lets us know that this scene takes place somewhere in between Grievous's massacre on Dathomir and Order 66. We see Quinlan carry the body of Asajj Ventress, and some of you might be surprised to see Ventress like this, as she was very much alive the last time we saw her on screen. Much of Ventress's story has been changed quite a bit here and there, and lots of it was actually continued in the book Dark Disciple. To summarize the long story, we learned that during the closing chapters of the Clone Wars, Quinlan was tasked by the Jedi Council to hunt down and assassinate Count Dooku, which led him to cross paths with Ventress. The two would work together to kill the Count, which obviously failed, as Anakin ultimately finished the job at the end of the day. During this time, however, Quinlan actually fell to the dark side after encouragement from Ventress, and the two at the same time would also end up being romantically involved, which is why we hear Quinlan say this.
I will always love you.
Now, Quinlan would continue to fall further, especially after the failed assassination attempt on Dooku, and was only really pulled back into the light when Ventress sacrificed herself to save him in their final encounter with Count Dooku. The book also mentions that Kenobi and Vos gave Ventress a funeral on Dathomir, burying her in the traditional way of her people, which I guess is what we now see on screen. Now, there is some discrepancy here, as the traditional way of burial in Dathomir wasn't previously demonstrated to be as such. In fact, we see that many of the Night Sisters actually buried their dead by wrapping them up and hanging them from trees, something which we see in the Clone Wars. So it's not really clear if this is the first part of the burial process, or perhaps a special burial reserved for certain members of their society. Ventress supposedly reawakens in the water, but only as a spirit, and we hear the voice of Mother Talzin speaking. Talzin was the matriarch of the Night Sisters during the Clone Wars and actually officially died in the comics, helping Darth Maul face off against the Sith, which is probably why Ventress is surprised to hear Mother Talzin's voice. Talzin alludes to how their romantic connection provides Ventress with the means to return to the living in exchange for never seeing Quinlan again. And it's not clear how all of this is really possible, but we do know that Night Sister magic is very powerful and not fully explored. It might seem like a pretty cheesy and cheap way to revive Ventress, but there does appear to be a significant cost, as we see her surroundings completely decay, perhaps suggesting that it took all of the remaining Night Sister magic for it to happen. Another point to note is that we can really see Ventress's new life as her penance for all the sins she committed during the Clone Wars. Being alive but unable to see her lover sounds a whole lot like purgatory, with Quinlan always in sight and in reach but never touching. We next find Ventress working in a spaceport, likely in the Outer Rim, as a security guard / bouncer. She talks about how she wants to have a quiet life, but we all know that's not going to happen. We are then introduced to the Jedi Padawan Lyko Strata, who, like many other Jedi at this point in time, are on the run from the Empire. We also see a stormtrooper patrol with a probe droid, letting us know that we are now roughly in the time period after the events of the final season of the Bad Batch, not including the post-credit scene. Anyways, Asajj quickly figures out that the boy is a Jedi after he tries to use a mind trick, and the whole thing blows up when the ticket seller sells them out to the Empire. The two make their way off planet, and we get few moments where we see the Padawan eagerly trying to talk to her, as he thinks that she is a Jedi, which of course we know is not the case. A lot of this reflects the naivety and carelessness of the Padawan, something which Asajj keeps pointing out in the next few episodes. The Padawan talks about the path, a means to get Jedi in hiding to safety, and the path is something that was first mentioned in the Kenobi show. In fact, the Kenobi show also points out that Quinlan Vos survived Order 66, something which comic readers would have already known, but it was our first confirmation on screen.
Quinlan was here.
And as it turns out, we learn that Quinlan is running the path, which is no surprise. The two are interrupted as an Inquisitor tracks them down, and we see Asajj seriously struggle against this one in particular. Now this is kinda surprising, as Asajj is one of the best fighters in the galaxy, able to go toe to toe with the likes of Kenobi and Ahsoka, so it's actually quite surprising we see this no-name Inquisitor best her. But I think a lot of this has to do with how out of practice she is, especially after coming back from the dead. It's also worth pointing out that the Inquisitor quickly figures out that she is not a Jedi based on her fighting style, which is a cool little detail, as Jedi typically fight more defensively, while Asajj fights more aggressively due to her dark side heritage. By the end of the episode, Asajj reveals to Lyko her true name, and on we go to episode 2. The two land on some planet with a lot of neon lights. Lyko is suspicious of her due to her history, but Asajj keeps saying that she is not interested in killing Jedi, a point of character development that occurred after being betrayed during the Clone Wars by Dooku. We also learn that she is still somewhat interested in finding Quinlan Vos through the path, something which changes by the 3rd episode. The two meet up with two bounty hunters who happen to be very old faces from the Clone Wars. We see a droid by the name of Highsinger and a female bounty hunter by the name of Latz Ratzi. These two were previously introduced in the Clone Wars show as part of the Krait's Claw, a bounty hunting group put together by Boba Fett. We see the two of them fighting a four-handed alien, which reminded me of the traitorous Jedi Pong Krell, who was also a four-handed and of similar build, but I'm not entirely sure if it is the same species. Another interesting detail is that just before the fight breaks out, we can actually see the moment Highsinger confronts the target, straight up just walking towards him with his guns pointed, which I thought was kind of funny, but also not surprising, as we learn later that the target was worth more alive than dead, so this was likely Highsinger trying to get him to cooperate. The hunters agree to help on the basis that the two of them help them with a heist for a resistance group. We learn that the mission is to steal an Imperial Shield relay unit from a shipyard on Kasaro, an item which can be found in these spheres which go on top of, as we learn later, a Star Destroyer. Which makes sense, as these spheres up top next to the Star Destroyer's command bridge are actually deflector shield generator domes used to protect the ship. It's also worth pointing out that at this point in time, Star Destroyers are still quite new to the galaxy, which is why Latz calls it some kind of new starship. Lyko points out the difficulty of sneaking in due to the quad sensors on the Venators, which immediately informs the hunters that he is a Jedi, as only insiders would know about such information, again speaking to his naivety. Latz tries to sow discord between Lyko and Ventress, something which doesn't really work at all. They manage to sneak in and get a hand on the item, but they are then interrupted by a patrol. Highsinger does this pretty cool move, which really reminded me of the one scene in The Mandalorian. The whole plan goes up in flames, which leads the bounty hunters to double-cross them as a means to get some credits on Lyko, but the two manage to overcome this and gain the intel they need. We also get to see the bond between Asajj and Lyko deepens as we move forward. On to episode 3, and we see that the two travel through the desert of an unknown planet. Lyko plays a prank on Asajj with his empty water bottle, bringing a small amount of levity, and the two stumble across a homestead. We even see broken B-1 battle droids around the homestead, and Asajj comments that they look as effective as always, referencing how they were pretty much cannon fodder for the wars. The two almost get gunned down by a little girl, but are ultimately welcomed in by an old man, who, as it turns out, recognizes Asajj as he was once a separatist general. We even see his old separatist medals hung up on the wall. The old man talks about how Asajj was in Dooku's shadow and praises her for her contributions during the war, calling her Lady Ventress. It's interesting because it also reveals that he knows nothing about how Dooku subsequently betrayed Asajj. He also mentions that the Separatists were ultimately right, referencing the fact that the Republic became an empire, and also reflecting about how many on the Separatist side really did think that they were fighting on the side of freedom, something which was explored in the Clone Wars. Asajj corrects him by saying that both sides got it wrong, which is probably the most accurate statement and one that few truly realize due to how Sidious played both sides. On the wall of the homestead, we can also see masks hanging on the walls, which, as we learn later, belong to the local inhabitants, indicating that the old man likely took them as trophies. They agree on leading the two of them to the canyon in exchange for helping them retrieve water, and the old man says from one warrior to another, referencing the title of this episode. And what I really love about this particular episode is that it's really all about the exchange between two warriors scarred by their experiences of the war. And there is this sort of unspoken understanding and respect shared between the two, a level of familiarity that becomes important later on. As the three collect water, they are ambushed by supposed raiders, which as it turns out was really just a bunch of natives protecting their land. Lyko figures this out using his empathetic Jedi skills, something which Asajj wouldn't really have acquired. Lyko tells Asajj they need her help to convince the old man, and this is really where the episode elevates itself. As expected, the old man has a lot of difficulties letting go, and it goes beyond the fact that he doesn't trust the natives, but actually speaks volumes about the bigger thing that he is unable to let go, that being the war. The trauma caused by the war aside, it can only be imagined how difficult it is to let go when it's something you have devoted yourselves towards. Not only that, but the difficulty of losing the war you've fought so long in is incredibly difficult. In some sense, within the mind of the old man, the Clone Wars never really went away. You can almost see the B1s propped outside as an illustration of this mentality. And so when Asajj steps in and tells him to let go, it also creates this parallel where Asajj was likely the only person there who could have convinced him, as she too was a warrior with similar experiences, but at the very least had the opportunity to leave it all behind before the war even ended. So it's a nice way of using Asajj's character development up until this point as a means to effect change around her. There is also a nice little detail where we see the old man trembling as he is holding his blaster, a sign of his old age and state of mind. Asajj manages to get Lyko to the rendezvous point, but Asajj decides to stay behind and not go with him. In other words, foregoing her initial desire to see Quinlan Vos, perhaps a reminder of Mother Talzin's words and the reiteration that her second life is really purgatory where she must repent for her sins. Lyko ultimately changes his mind and decides to stay with her, and I think his decision to do so really does kick off an interesting mentor-mentee relationship that we've not quite seen in Star Wars before, with Asajj being the reluctant master with the dark past, repenting for her sins by guiding her new, naive, and overly eager apprentice. All I can say is that it's a show that I would consider watching. We move on to episode 4 featuring Cad Bane's origin story, and we begin on the planet Duro, Cad Bane's home world, and we see him and his best friend running through the streets as orphans. We see the two hungry children stare at some Maelurans, and as they pick through the scraps, we stop briefly to watch the news with the headline "Local Crime Wave," indicating that crime rates are on the rise on this particular planet. We even get to see a chase scene and a crash which uses the iconic Wilhelm scream heard many times before in the franchise. Given Cad Bane's age at this time, these events are likely taking place well before the events of the Clone Wars. Another kid by the name of Blick asks them what they were doing, and Blick's parents quickly pulls him aside and tells him not to interact with these so-called street rats. It's really just a super harsh way to treat some orphans looking for food to eat, but also emphasizes how cold this society is, all of which helps feeds this systematic inequality that pushes youth into crime as a means to survive. And this short scene is also super important because it also emphasizes how the way society treats its poor is also an intergenerational problem. You can imagine that as Blick begins to grow up, he will likely tell his kids the same thing, as that's what he was taught when he was younger, creating this vicious cycle. Nero and Bane, then named Colby, end up stealing from a droid to survive, all while being watched by a man with a hat, the very same Bane would later adopt. The stranger by the name of Laszlo offers them a coin, and notice that the coin he offers isn't the usual shape Republic credits come in. So this is likely indicating that Duro uses a separate currency or have yet to integrate into the Republic's monetary system at this point in time. As the stranger offers them coin and now the means to buy food, it's also worth noting that this is precisely how criminals take advantage of such children. Given that supposedly upstanding citizens see children like Nero and Colby with such disdain, it's really no surprise that the lack of empathy pushes them towards characters such as Laszlo, who take advantage of them by offering them to give what they need. The two eat well that night, and the next day, the stranger tempts them by offering them more money in exchange for a job. The stranger offers them 5 times the amount, and here we see how Nero is naturally more cautious than Colby, while Colby is far greedier of the two, characteristics that foreshadow who they will be down the line. The operation goes ahead, and as they make their escape, it also becomes pretty evident that Colby is the more athletic of the two, again another indication of the outcome of their later confrontation. Nero gets caught and Colby is welcomed into the crime family. This particular divergence in path, as we will see later, becomes informative to the people they eventually become. It's also worth noting that there is a subtle sign of shock as Nero realizes that Colby has abandoned him. But as we see in the next episode, he doesn't really hold on to grudges, something that Colby struggles a lot more with. On to episode 5, and we see that Cad Bane has now grown up and is eager to prove himself. Laszlo heads off on a mission without him, and we see that Cad has a romantic partner by the name of Aaron. The two play a game of sabacc while waiting for Laszlo, and they soon learn that Laszlo has been shot dead by the local marshal. All that remains is his hat, which he takes up. And again, while this provides an origin story to how he got his iconic look, this episode also adds a richer level of detail as the hat, beyond just looking cool, now symbolizes a marker of intergenerational trauma and cycle of hate that crime can bring. Something that those pushed into crime experience and become agents of perpetuation. Nero and Cad reunite and Cad gives him a warm hug, but things turn chilly when Nero reveals that he is now a lawman. It's an interesting duality between the two as it places an emphasis just how important surroundings are when it comes to the development of a child. Simply put, because Cad grew up amongst criminals, he has become the way he is, while Nero, the luckier of the two, must have been rehabilitated well by the system. It's also worth noting that throughout this episode, Erin constantly puts a hand on her stomach, indicating that she is pregnant. Erin tries to convince Cad to let it go, but Cad is just far too ingrained in this cycle of crime to do anything different. He is so obsessed with getting revenge that he is unable or unwilling to see the greater joys life can provide him, something which ultimately leads to a bitter end later on. Bane and the Marshal have a showdown and Bane comes out on top as Nero interrupts, but Aaron also gets hit. Aaron tries to get him to let go, but he tells her that he can't. Aaron ultimately removes Cad's blaster to disarm him, which he sees as a betrayal, far too consumed by anger and hate to realize that she just saved his life. What is also interesting is that throughout all of this, Nero doesn't harbor any hate for Bane. Instead, despite his own mentor being shot, he offers Bane pity and the benefit of the doubt, something which we see more of in the last episode. And the divergence between both of their reactions to the death of their mentor speaks a lot about their outlook on life, a clash of paradigms between an eye for an eye and one of forgiveness. Episode 6 kicks off and we see that Duro has become a much better place since the events of the last episode. We also learn that Cad is about to be released due to a technicality, something which frightens a lot of people. We also see that Cad's child Isaac is being taken care of by Nero, and we hear his deputy say that he has never killed anyone, a sign that things have really become a lot better on Duro as an entire generation has grown up without violence. At the town council, council members are panicking over the situation, and they tell Nero that he should just kill Bane straight away or run away, something which Nero outright rejects, giving his old friend the benefit of the doubt. And while as the audience you know that the council members are right, you can't help but feel that Nero has to stand on his principles if he wants to make a lasting change in the community. In some sense, he has to set an example of the ideal society he wants to create, even if it means risking his life. We also learn that Aaron married Nero while Bane was locked up, something which angers Bane even more. When we see Bane, we also see that he now has a toothpick in his mouth, another signature behavior of the character. Nero sends Asajj away, and the reason for him doing so, instead of using Asajj to convince Bane, is to ensure that Asajj isn't also caught up in this violence and vicious cycle of revenge. The last thing Nero wants is for Asajj to experience the life he and Bane experienced when they were younger. Asajj decides to go back to his dad, and as the gunfight ensues, it's no surprise that Bane comes out on top. Nero tries to tell Bane that he has a son, but Bane is just so consumed by hatred that he can't listen. It's only after Nero is dead that there is this recognition in Bane's eyes that Asajj could be his son. But by then, Bane is simply too far gone to admit anything else. It's a rather tragic moment, and as Bane walks away, you can't help but think that leaving Asajj behind may be the one last good thing he will ever do in his life. So that is all for the breakdown of the Tales of the Underworld. It sure was interesting. Overall, not quite as good as the Tales of the Jedi, but it's a decent addition. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte.
And I have spoken.